Okay. So I do have the agenda. These were just some stuff we wanted to talk about tonight. Um, have that up where you can kind of just get a quick look at some of the stuff we wanted to kind of go over. And most of it's just a brief recap. Why are we doing this? We were going to talk about the yard signs and then go into some things that are pertinent mainly from the last week or so. Um, as we've done a lot of, talking to various people throughout the HOA and around the city and county as well. So let's dig right in. I'm going to go ahead and turn off the screen share here. All right. So basically, as we are, going through this process to get our voices heard by our neighbors and the HOA and trying to, and just in general, make sure that everybody's aware of all the options and what we are looking at going forward. That's been, our primary goal thus far. And a lot of what we've covered in the prior meetings has been how do we get this information out to our neighbors? We've done the yard signs, we've done flyers, we've talked about other options, some of which we'll talk about a little bit later on here. So mainly that's been our goal, and we are getting heard. I mean, the HOA is actively talking about this topic because there's enough people who are sitting here and making it known that there's a lot of frustration within the HOA, within everything. And so that's kind of what we've done in the prior meetings. Tonight we wanted to just kind of go over some helpful tips and where our progress stands, things like that. We want to make sure that everybody is involved in a respectful and an honest conversation with their neighbors. And we want people to be able to make a decision, but we also want it to be an educated decision. We know there are going to be people who are on both sides of the issue, and that's great as long as they actually understand the implications of their decisions. And that's always the trick. Some people will react purely out of spite on both sides. So that's a big, a big part of it. Oh, I see we've got Rhonda's video. So some of the things that we've done to start with have been, the flyer campaign. Currently, a big one that we're working on is the yard signs. We initially ordered 100 of the yard signs, and then due to a happy shipping mistake, wound up with some bonus yard signs, which was very nice. And so we've got about 200 of them in total. I've got about 65 of them out currently throughout the neighborhood. We'd love to see everybody have the opportunity to have those in their yard if they want them. I am always happy to drop them by any time of the day. And I'm usually pretty quick. If somebody requests one, generally 12 hours to 18 hours, it's in their yard at the very longest. The yard signs is just a good way to draw attention to the fact and try and get people to understand where we're going with all of this. And it also gives the reference of the website where people can go and look at all of the references that are there. Look at, there's a study there on home values, HOA versus non-HOA. There's all of the governing documents, copies of those are there along with the town hall. Pretty much everything that's been released is there, along with all of our videos from our Zoom calls. And, we just want to make sure that people are able to have an honest conversation about it. And that's kind of been the trick. And welcome Clayton Anderson there. So a big trick, as we're going through this is how do we address our neighbors without conflict? Especially if you don't know where your neighbor's opinion lies on things. And that's, we want to be able to spark healthy adult conversation. We want to be able to have everybody understand the differences between, positive, beneficial, um, you know, things that the HOA gives us versus the, illegal and non-beneficial points. And I think that that's a big thing that most people don't really understand. So I kind of wanted to just touch on, how do we address our neighbors without conflict? I've been certainly the target of a little bit of conflict from a few neighbors, and I think that that's one of those things that people definitely need to be respectful on all sides of the issue. I'm just gonna type a quick message here. So part of what we're wanting to do is to talk to our neighbors with an intelligence behind it and a reason behind it and a purpose behind it, but we also want to be able to understand their point of view and hear them out. And that's always one of those tricks that I think is we have to be better than ourselves when we're talking with somebody, especially if we don't know their viewpoint. It may be as simple as, hey, what do you think about everything that's going on? And then let them bring their viewpoint up, and then you can go ahead and start having that conversation. It could be as simple as that. It could be as, hey, I saw you got, you know, had Parker Brown parked in front of your house for 10 minutes yesterday. Did you get a fine? Or, I mean, it could be almost any number of things. But, we want to be able to engage with our neighbors. All of this happens because we are being neighbors. I've seen more communication across the board throughout our neighborhood over the last month than I've seen in the last 5 years. It's really been astounding, and I'm seeing more and more people who are coming out of their shells, so to speak, and wanting to actually be involved in the neighborhood, which is incredible. And I think that also involving, healthy adult conversations. There's no reason to dumb it down for somebody. It's one of those. On the contrary, if you speak from a point of intelligence, if you speak with information, if you speak with facts, people are going to be more likely to listen to you. And I think that that's one of those points that's always beneficial to people. Um, and as you're making those points, you can, always use things like, oh, well, the HOA was doing this and they wanted to do this, which are illegal, or they are doing this, which really doesn't give us any benefit. Or, hey, they're doing this one thing and that is a benefit. And I do agree that that's a great thing, but is it worth all of the other bad? So there's a lot of stuff there. And I think we'll go through just a couple of examples a little bit later on um, when I get into this next topic here. As we've spent some time, the last meeting we held on here, which was about a week ago, we had some good feedback, and some of the questions that were brought forth were, why don't we contact Lehigh City as far as code enforcement and try and see if we can get them to simply look at our CCNRs and go, yeah, that would be covered, that wouldn't. So I spent quite a bit of time on the phone and talked with one of the Lehigh City code enforcement officers who's very familiar with the situation here. And there was actually a lot of stuff that he told me flat out that they just simply cannot um, enforce, such as parking. I know that that's always been kind of a weird issue in this neighborhood. We're city streets, we're city sidewalks. The city has its own rules. Well, if you actually look at the proposed CCNRs, one of the things they wanted to talk about was parking. Well, the HOA really doesn't even need to mention that because the HOA cannot regulate parking on the city streets. In fact, if they were to do so, and this came directly from the Lehigh Code Enforcement Officer, if they were to do so and it got wind back to the city could actually come in and fine the corporation. So there's these liability things there that are kind of kind of stretching a little bit. And I don't know why the board is not getting legal advice on those things as to, oh, you can't do this. I know one of the hot button issues too in the town hall was the flags. You know, you can only fly one flag of a size we deem appropriate. They can't regulate that. There's actually a federal code that the state code refers to, and the city code refers to the state code. And ultimately, it says as long as the flag is being displayed appropriately, according to federal flag codes, you can have as many of them and whatever size. There are no limitations on that. Obviously, nobody here is going to put a 40 by 60 flag.
Can I just jump in really?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, go ahead, Rhonda.
And I mean, case in point, they can't even regulate our community flag right now. All three are at half mast and we are out. We literally, if you are not flying the flag correctly, state, federal, whatever, they can, I mean, that's against, they can fine you. Like we can be in trouble because our community flag is like, who's regulating that? Clearly not the HOA. I feel like they zone in on the things that, whoops. You. They zone in on the things they want to zone in on, and then so much else is falling through the cracks. And so, anyway, just when you mention flags, it's like they can't regulate yard. They can't even regulate our one, you know, in the entrance. They're like, we are still at half mast, you know.
Well,
and anyway.
And you bring up a good point there, and I would be willing to bet there's most of the neighborhood doesn't even know. We don't own the monument. The property, that city park, that city maintained, that's all city. The city technically actually owns the flagpoles even. But for some reason, the neighborhood is responsible.
Actually, we were in charge. We were sort of we were voluntold the second, well, for the first 2 years we were here by a board member. For 2 years, we maintained that pole. Our family, we were told because we had scouts that we should take our turn. It ended up being no one said anything after the first year. We did it when finally we turned it, said, yeah, Lehigh City's not maintaining that. It's from what I understand, supposed to be the board.
Correct.
The board has the key currently because I gave it back to them when we stopped. So the board is supposed to be maintaining that flag.
Correct, and that's where I was going to go with that. Was it's never been like published in our budgets, at least as long as John and I have lived in this neighborhood, that we actually have a contract with Colonial Flag for the replacement and maintenance of the flags themselves, and it falls on one of our board members typically to actually maintain that and run, you know, operate the flags themselves. But it's strange that that's not the property itself is city, but we have that management responsibility of the flags. Well, that's great, but they've never even really said anything about that in any of the recent budgets. And from what I understand from talking to somebody who was in the know, it's a multi-$1,000 contract for those flags every year. That's a big amount of money that's spent out of what little bit of budget we have left on something, and it's just buried someplace in our budget. Nobody knows that this is going on, and that's a, you know, a problem. And that's kind of one of those things that we found all this stuff out, and it's just kind of like, well, why don't people know this? Why is this not? Because we're supposed to get an itemized budget every year. And for the last at least 5 years, the budget has basically been, we took in averaged, take that January hit of all the dues and we average that across 12 months. And then so we say we took in about this much each month. And because they paid Parker or whatever management company at the time, probably in one lump sum, we spent about this each month, and they try and amortize it out over the whole year. Well, that's not an exact accounting, down to when they have the barbecue, how much was spent on the barbecue, down to the dollar and cents for it, because there's so many regulations and we're technically a nonprofit corporation. All of that stuff is supposed to be inspectable. And I had spoken with our current treasurer, and he basically said there's very few records of a lot of this stuff. And that's kind of a scary thought, because if something happened that all of a sudden the corporation itself got sued, well, the corporation is all of us homeowners. And if there's no accounting for every penny, who does that fall on? That's going to fall on either the liability insurance for the neighborhood, the director's insurance for the board, or the individual homeowners, and it will wind up being a special assessment. And that's just not a reasonable answer to me. And I think that that's, yeah, you make a good point, Rhonda. That's a huge thing that people don't know for the most part. I'm sure, because you guys have lived here pretty much the whole time, I think, right?
This will be 7 years in July. So
Yeah.
no, I mean, but a good portion of the time. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's, and I've talked to other homeowners too, and people who've been here longer. I've talked to people who are up there in phase one, who are original homeowners. They were original builders. They had no idea the flag contract or any of that stuff was out there. Most of them had no idea that there was even this thing that somebody from the board actually has to go up there or somebody who's appointed has to go up there and adjust those. It's pretty astounding, some of the stuff that we found out over the time. Other stuff, like I say, the parking one has been a big hot button issue. And some of the people I spoke with said, well, yeah, but what do I do if my neighbor wants to park 3 cars in front of their house? Are they legally parked, and are they moved every 48 hours per city law? If they are, there's not a lot you can do about it. But if there's a problem, I'm not calling the HOA to solve that problem anyways. I'm calling Lehigh City Police, because that's a parking issue. That's a streets issue. If my neighbor has a dog that's barking at 3 a.m. for, a week in a row, I'm calling the police to go file a noise, warning to the homeowner to try and find out, why is that dog barking? Because that's a violation. That's a city-run violation. And so much of that stuff, the board kind of wants to put in their documents so that they can cover it, but ultimately it's not something that they even have authority on. And if challenged and it came down to an issue between the city and the HOA, or the state and the HOA, we would be, we'd be up a creek and in a heck of a place, to keep it clean, so to speak. One of the things that conversation with the Lehigh City Code Enforcement Officer brought about was, he's seen, because of his responses with various people throughout the HOA, that there seems to be a couple of different kinds of enforcement going on. There's blanket enforcement on some of the really easy stuff, some of the real simple stuff, but then there's selective enforcement on a whole lot more. I know, Rhonda, you're nodding your head. Yes, John and I have been targeted of it too. It's not fun, and it sucks. It's just brutal. And I think that that's something that, unfortunately, legally, you start to create a precedent, and you say, well, okay, that person can have their shed, but we're not going to allow anybody else to have the same shed. They just slipped one by us. Well, that's not how things work legally. Once you allow something for one person, even though they try to put documents in there that say this isn't the case, just because we allowed it here, that does not nullify the whole rule. Well, that's what case law is. Case law is, you ruled one way for part A, So now when Part B wants the same thing that Part A wants, you've got to give that to them unless there's a full counter ruling, which is not happening. So part of that, is there's these different kinds of enforcement that happen. And there's also no enforcement on certain rules. If we wanted to get real technical, there's a lot of houses in this neighborhood that should be repainted back to the original color slates of the tans, beiges, browns, whites, and those, because there's a lot of houses that are blues and greens and all of that. Go ahead, Rhonda.
Unless supposedly there's been an approval of that. And I guarantee if you were to pull up, ask the board to provide verification that those homes went through an ACC and were approved for those changes, they're not going to be able to produce that. You can't tell, like, just our house, our whole process, we were meticulous. When we had to make a decision in 2 days what to do, we drove around, found things that we liked, pulled up the CCNRs. Everything requesting was according to, straight out of the CCNRs. And the fact that we were still put on, through the rigmarole, it was ridiculous. And then when we wanted to push legally, we found out in the CCNRs that we would be responsible for our legal fees and the HOA's legal fees. So as a homeowner, you have no protection to try and enforce and try to push for your own rights. You have no protection. So basically we would be up against, we're basically suing our neighbors because they're the ones paying the legal fees through the HOA. And it was maddening and frustrating, and it shouldn't be, it just shouldn't be that way.
No, it certainly shouldn't. And I've pointed out to some people who weren't familiar with some of the issue. There's another house over here on Willow Trail closer to ours. We call it the Dr. Seuss house. It's periwinkle blue, and they've painted the brick a dark blue. And we pointed out that was approved without any issue, but then you have gone through utter hell trying to get it dealt with, and your house is gorgeous. Honestly, John and I are a little bit jealous because your house looks so gorgeous. And I think that, I took some picture. I took a picture of the front of your house, just FYI, and showed people, and they went, "Oh no, the white one should have been improved without any problem." You would think so, but no. And you make a good point. You've said exactly where I was going with this, and that is there has been this, as part of this selective enforcement stuff, this threat by the board of, well, you can't sue us for anything. And if you sue us, we're going to assess the cost against your house. We were told by our attorney that was not even legal, that they can't just blanket assess it against your home, and that if you got to a point where you got the judgment in the lawsuit, if they tried to come back and assess that against your house, you would basically have an additional lawsuit and punitives on top of that, which, again, there's this big concern with, oh, we want directors' liability insurance, and we want embezzlement insurance, and we want this insurance, and we want that insurance. But why do we need all these millions of dollars of policies if we can't be sued for anything?
Exactly. And the other, in one of the meetings, I think it was the NHOA meeting, the recent one, I caught just a part of it, but someone had asked, well, can we submit this change on top of these other changes? And they said, well, we can only submit one change at a time for homeowners to sign, because if they're when they sign, they're signing for all of the changes listed. Yet they're trying to make these changes on the whole, however 100-page document, and pass it and say, if you sign, these changes, then you're signing for the whole thing. Why can't we go through, if they're adamant about making changes, make them go section by section, painstakingly through every section, every paragraph has to go through that same process so that all the homeowners know that they're signing for that paragraph, for that thing. It is not feasible to reread everything and try to find everything that they have changed on a proposal. Like, it's not feasible.
No, it's not. And I think that there's some taking advantage of the confusion over the legal terms, and slipping this in and slipping that in to, honestly, who knows, slide some things past that they know the HOA members wouldn't really want, but that they think would be beneficial. And I can tell you, it is a board that has, I know that there are some differences in opinions on the board, which is great, but that doesn't solve the problem at this point. I know that that's a big thing.
Brandon, one other concern too is the inconsistency. They have hired Parker Brown to come by and babysit the weeds in everybody's yard. Yet here we have corners on our streets, we have mailboxes, we have entrances that look horrendous. And there's no, it's up to the city. Well, no, we are paying HOA fees. Maybe the HOA needs to hire, if they want individual homes maintained meticulously, maybe they need to spend some money making sure that those other public areas are showing the example and are maintained. It's like they want to pick what they want to pick, but they don't want to do. It's like the HOA doesn't. It's like they're exempt or something. It's not. Look at the public areas in our neighborhood. It's embarrassing, but yet they want to pick. They want to nitpick the yards, and they want to nitpick this and that, or babysit what people do. If you want to change a bush, you have to, go through that ACC process. Are you really like we don't have time for this? And so, but yet look at the public areas, those public streets as you come into the neighborhood, they're awful.
Rhonda, like you were saying, to remove a bush, very valid point. With their proposal, the way you read that ACC section, and if you read it literally the way it states, removal of vegetation requires an ACC application. During the summer, when everyone's watering their lawn, do you know what everyone does at least once a week? Mows the lawn. That's removal of vegetation, which literally reading that means you have to do an ACC application every single time you mow the lawn. That is not anywhere close to the community that anyone bought into when they bought a home in Jordan Willows.
Or make people send in applications every time they want to pull those weeds that Parker Brown tells them to pull. That's removing vegetation. So,
well, and technically, John and I have got a substantial cactus garden. If you're people who've driven back through our part, we're on the corner of Oakcrest and Olive, on Oakcrest, and people come by, and we're the cactus people. If you've driven back by this part in the summer and seen the house with 50 different pots of cactus out front, technically we should have to get a permit to move our cactus in and out when the seasons change, or if it's going to get cold and we have to bring them in or something. Again, there's so many of these things that are just silly. and people, I know everybody here is tired of it. I've spoken to, I would guess now 140 people in this neighborhood who are tired of it. And they just don't feel like this represents the best of what our neighborhood is. I've certainly talked to a few who desperately think we need the HOA to maintain property values. And, we got to keep these people from not maintaining their properties. And my response is, okay, but there are already homes in our neighborhood that are deficient, just like there are in any neighborhood in any place anywhere in this country. And those homes are still there, and they've been deficient
And
for
nothing's being done.
Yeah.
Nothing's being done. If the city can't enforce it, the HOA thinks they can enforce it.
And that's a big thing that they literally showed their hand when they said, but we will never foreclose on a home. If you take away the ultimate punishment, there is no reason for somebody to pay the fines or to even care, because they're going to say, oh, well, you're not going to take my home away from me. I don't ever intend on selling my home. So, hell, I don't care. What are you going to do to me? Just do whatever. I don't care. And, I know I've spoken with a couple other homeowners that have gotten pretty outlandish fines built up. And their attitude is, I don't care. What's the HOA going to do to me? Yeah, they can put a lien on the house. That's great. When I go to sell it, that's, there's that. But that's really it. I mean, that's about all there is to it. And I think that that's, one of those things, and it's frustrating to me. We didn't want to buy in an HOA. John and I desperately didn't want to be in an HOA, but there are no homes out there. And I've talked with a couple of real estate agents now, and they've kind of all given us the same thing over and over, which is that they are seeing these trends. Nobody comes in and says, oh, I want to buy in an HOA. Nobody does. People might say, I want to live in a neighborhood where there's a pool and those things, but they at least understand that, okay, there are those things, so there is going to be an HOA. But most people come in, they go, I don't want to buy in an HOA at all. And go ahead.
I'm sorry. I've talked to at least two people that this has come up with. And when they moved in, we do not want an HOA. The house is not in an HOA, correct? We're told yes. They showed up at signing and they slipped them the paper to sign for the HOA thing. Said, wait a minute, we were told this was not. Oh, well, it is. What is with that point? Not start all over when keys that day to a house.
Yeah, and that's the big thing. I mean, I know of at least 3 different people that I've talked to that have gone through that situation. And that's kind of sketchy, to say the least. Somebody, obviously, whether it was the listing agent or whether it was, for the builder, whether it was the builder themselves or whether it was somebody involved with the HOA, there's been some dishonest dealings with those, obviously. I know I've talked with at least 24 people who've reported that when they built their home, they were told the HOA would only be here long enough to get the lot sold, and then it would dissolve. And that has, unfortunately, nobody has been able to find like any written proof of that. Because if we had written proof, it would be go to the board and say, well, your time has come. Here you go. This is what houses were being sold as. So you have to meet that, or you're going to wind up in even worse shape off. And that's pretty rough. Go ahead, Clayton.
I think it's really important for us to to define what those who are in favor of the HOA, what they believe the HOA actually is doing or will do or can do for them, versus like you said earlier, the negative consequences, the unintended consequences. I think I mentioned to you when you brought the sign the other day that, you know, reading that new set of CCRs is like reading a prison document. We're guilty, and they're giving us themselves all kinds of reasons why they can punish us and ways that they can punish us. And to me, that is a bad approach to any kind of community document anyway. It starts off with a bad tone, and it goes on with this idea, you're going to give us power to do these things. You're going to give us power to raise money. We never will, but we may have the, to give a special assessment. And I'm thinking, well, if it's there, it can be used. We should see in our world today that politicians are good at pushing right to the edge of whatever their authority is. And, people are people. They'll do it whether they're a politician or whether they're just on an HOA board as a volunteer. Somebody gets a little power hungry, and if it's in there, they can do it. And that's what I'm looking at is it's kind of a self-serving thing. We have an HOA to protect against certain things, which we haven't identified exactly. But when we do have an HOA, we actually incur a lot of liability because they could be sued and then everybody could be assessed. And we have this HOA, so that won't happen. And we have a HOA board, so they can be protected. And so it's this vicious circle. And my thought is, if we didn't have an HOA, most of that stuff would be gone. I wouldn't be worried about it getting a special assessment from the HOA. I wouldn't worry about, I'm going to take the risk that one of my neighbors is going to put a car in their front yard and put it on blocks and leave it there and let the weeds grow over it. I'm pretty sure I could convince the city code enforcement officer to come and take care of that.
Exactly.
The rest of that stuff, Rhonda, I'm sorry, I don't even notice the entrance when I come in. I don't care because I'm trying to get home, but I get it. The entrance is part of who we are as an organization, but we're not doing about it anyway. I mean, who owns that piece of property on where the power lines go through? Is that the part of the HOA? Is that part of our community?
It's Lehigh City.
I'm over by our house.
I think that would be a great for a community garden. If we're going to do something as a community, it'd be great to put a community garden space in there. There are things that the HOA or that an organization, not even have to be an HOA, can do that's positive, that would make everybody feel more comfortable with it. Sorry, long-winded.
No, but that's a.
And I'm not necessarily. That's. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, Rhonda.
That's what I'm saying, though. I'm not necessarily saying that the public areas are not necessarily my thing. I'm just saying if you're gonna, if they're gonna harp on people's yards and the weed that they have in their yard, boy, they better be paying attention and doing what they can to. If that's the level of
weeds.
Perfection that they want individually, they better make sure that the neighborhood is projecting that, the public areas are projecting that level as well, and it's inconsistent.
Yeah, it kind of has the current mentality kind of has the sense of being in kindergarten. We're all being in Miss Daisy's kindergarten class, and she's gonna make us put away the paints and our toys, and if we don't, we're gonna have to sit in the corner, and we don't get story time. And that's just, I know there's some people that'll always push to the limit, but in the end, people got to be people. And I'm tired of the puke green and baby poop green house colors that we have in this neighborhood. So I'm hoping we get a little more leeway to paint things different colors and show a little individuality and still be a good neighborhood.
Well, and that's the biggest thing. I mean, it's not that hard to be a good neighbor. You talk to your neighbors and you don't get argumentative. I've heard people say, oh, well, what happens if my neighbor does this? Well, is it something that you can help just talk with them about? I mean, you always run the risk of there being that one neighbor that's, going to be a total jerk no matter what. And yeah, those situations suck. But the thing is that they'll only be a jerk to so many people for so long before, they just keep getting the police called on, they keep getting code enforcement called on them. And, things will eventually get better. It just takes time. And most people just don't want that. We live in a society of instant gratification. So we want this, we want to feel good about what we're doing right this very second, which is what the board has been trying to do. Hey, look, we're rewriting. We're going to feel good about it. Don't read it, because if you read it, you're going to be pissed, but for that 30 seconds, hey, look, we're doing something good. We're rewriting it. And that's just, it's ridiculous.
I think that's why we start with the starting point should be list all of the positive, all of the potentially valuable things that an HOA could bring to the community. And there maybe there's a dozen, maybe there's half a dozen. I don't know. I personally can't think of any because I hate it so much. I'd do anything to get rid of it. But I'm also a reasonable person and could see that, if we do have to have an HOA because there's not enough people to vote against it, then let's just put the things in there that are absolutely necessary in those people's minds and take the rest out and let us be a little bit more reasonable human beings.
Yeah. And that's a big part of it. And I think that, there's, like I said, there's so much stuff that happens within this, for example, I cornered someone and on the board and asked the question of, because we've been told repeatedly, okay, like all these violations that they get from Parker Brown, all of the weed violations, all of the, unsightly storage violations, all of that stuff. We've been told for years, oh yeah, every one of those gets reviewed by the board. No, they do not. In fact, I had a board member admit to me that the only time that they will go back and look at those photos and actually address the issue is if the homeowner complains in writing via email. Then they will go look back and look through the pictures.
And who do you complain to? Do you complain to Parker Brown or do you complain to the HOA board?
Well, this is all part of it too. John and I have kind of said over the years, why don't we have a PO box, for example? Why is there not a mailing address that we control instead of every time there's a document, a management company change? Now we have to change every single document. And every time the board changes, you got to change who's the primary mailing address because they keep bouncing that around. And it's this vicious circle of, serving themselves before serving anybody else.
Well, we have an HOA that hires a management company that is used to collect all the fees so that the HOA board doesn't have to collect the fees. And then the management company goes around and nitpicks at things because they got to prove their value to the board. And I don't know what they're being paid, but they got to be paying pretty decent. I think I want to get one of those cars. And I could drive around and charge you guys for looking at your yards. I'd do that once a month. Give it to me.
$18,000 a year is what they get paid.
So it just seems like we've created an organization that's have you ever seen that Escher picture where the hand is drawing itself?
Mhm.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of what the board feels like. It's there to draw itself and not the board, but the HOA. And it boggles my mind what I'm getting from the meager money. I mean, the good side is they're not charging us $200 or $500. I have a friend in Hebrew gets $500 a month assessment for his HOA. So, I mean, like there is one positive thing, right?
No, and that is a good point. I do have also knowledge. I don't know what night it was happening this week, but the HOA is actually meeting with Parker Brown to discuss the performance and, but who knows what's they're discussing. Are they saying, okay, it's spring, step up your enforcement? Or are they saying, look, you guys are not cutting it. We need to change again and have our fourth management company in 5 years, or what? I don't know. All I know is that they are meeting, and I was actually asked by one of the board members for feedback for Parker Brown for that meeting.
And why isn't that transparent? Why isn't that open when the homeowners have hired, because we all did that somehow, have hired Parker Brown. Why can't we be in on the meeting? We've hired Parker Brown, so why can't we be in on the meeting?
If you could ever figure that one out, I would be glad to hear it. John and I have over time, when we fought some of our issues with the board, we've asked, like one of them was one of our sheds that we had built. And part of the question was, well, okay, why, I can see 6 other sheds that have gone in the last 2 years. Did every single one of those, and we sent them pictures. Does every single one of those have an ACC? And the answer we got was, oh yeah. Can we see the ACC to prove that it has the AC? No. Well, okay, my mind immediately goes, nope, then those documents don't exist. They weren't approved. And yet we're getting grief by going through the approval process. We're trying to do the right thing and we're getting screwed. Rhonda, you guys, same thing.
That's what, when we went through our process, I drove around, I spent an hour and a half and drove around and took a picture of 43 houses that were currently, for all the reasons they were giving us on our proposals, out of regulation. And I sent all of those to them and I said, show us where these were approved. And we were approved very, very quickly after that.
But it shouldn't come to that.
And Rhonda, to that point, if you went around and had the 43 houses and photos and said, here you go, where were they approved? The reason why you suddenly got the approval is those approvals didn't exist.
And that's it.
Which was our point in doing that.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. And it's that, theoretically, because we're a nonprofit corporation and because we're all equal members of this corporation, in theory, we should all be able to ask to see proof of what has been done on any of these things. The answers that we've always gotten have been privacy, privacy, privacy. Well, guess what? We finally got the mailing list for the neighborhood. We know everybody's address, where they live, and what the name of the homeowner is, because we wanted to be able to mail out a mailer. Well, they didn't want to turn that over, citing privacy.
Yeah, that's public record. That's you could go, yeah, that's public record.
And that's how we got it. I called the county and got a very nice lady who was like, oh yeah, go here, do this. You can pull it right from the tax records. Here you go. And and it was even like, and I'll give you a tip. They're sorted this way. So, you can pretty much work your way through the neighborhood and confirm them, and which we did. It was not that hard. And it was like, okay, piece of cake. Why is there such a problem with giving us information when my only thing I can think is that they sit there and go, oh, gee, this could be used against us. And so there's that feeling of, oh my gosh, it could be used against us. We don't want to give that information up.
I think there's a sense that, I think honestly, people on the board believe they have a value to add to our neighborhood. Ultimately, you wouldn't do that job, I don't think, because unless they're embezzling funds, there's no gain from, financially to be on the board. I think it just needs to be, wrung out and rethought. And I don't know that you're going to get 400 people or 450, what is the number that votes it out? I'm not sure you're going to find that many people that are going to vote against it, because there's this idea that the status quo has been fine for me. So I really think our tack should be to reduce it down to something that's manageable enough that the 3 members of the board could take 1/3 of the neighborhood and travel it for an hour every month each to verify that everything seems to be looking pretty fine. And then that's all they have to do. collect the fees at the end of the year, and, you know, have the money there for doing some kind of refurbishment if, I don't know. But I think that needs to be the fallback position, is that we got to have something that's very narrow in scope, that's easily managed, so that nobody feels like they have to go hire this management company and pay all this money for them to drive around their cute little cars and find weeds in my yards that I could never find.
Well, part of that whole thing too, is that we've seen, I'm sure, if you've been to any of the board meetings, it seems to me that some of the board members seem to feel like they need to be bowed down and their feet kissed because they're doing this job for us, and it takes so much time. And we put in 40 hours a month. If you're putting in 40 hours a month with what's in this neighborhood and the requirements, you're doing something wrong, because it's not that complicated. One of our board members, our president, Chris Martin, is the president of two different HOAs. He's the president of our HOA, and then he has a condo in Provo. He's the president of that HOA. Why? Why would you want to be president of two HOAs, let alone one, unless you're doing it because you have an agenda or you have that need to fulfill power?
And a lot of political start with HOAs and doing, so he might have I don't know, I'm not saying he does or is, I'm just saying there's, other than financial, or not financial, it's a feather in your cap if you managed an HOA, I guess.
Some people just got to be the student body president. That's all there is to it.
Yeah, well, and it's unfortunate that that's where it's come to, but seeing all of that, and it just always frustrates me. So let me go ahead and we'll jump on, because I know we're running on an hour now. So we got just a couple more topics to go over, and then we can get back to some of the other chat. So kind of our next steps, obviously, as we've talked about, our big things are trying to make sure everybody in the neighborhood is aware of what's going on. We are still talking to people who are kind of like you've said, they're in that blissful ignorance of, yeah, I haven't had a problem with the HOA. I'm not too worried about them. I'm not going to stress about it. And they kind of just feel like, oh, well, it'll never happen to me, where I'll fall on that other side, which could just happen in a nanosecond.
And Brandon, that was our frustration. We never had word one with the HOA, never, ever, until we went to do their process and do it right, be the good people that did it right. And we were punished for having done that. So until you don't need the HOA for whatever, whatever, you won't have a problem. But people need to know that the HOA, it is not a protection to them. We discovered that the hard way, and people, that word needs to go out, that, and hopefully they never will need the HOA, never have to do anything. But when you do, it's a scary realization when you realize that not only are they not a protection to you, but you're in big trouble if you have to deal with them. And that's what was so frightening to us.
And I think that was something, I had reached out, I think, and sent you a Facebook message, I don't know, a week or so ago. But one of the things that we've kind of talked about doing are doing some little short, like 2-minute long videos. And we'll just call them like HOA horror stories or something along that line, where we can put together, okay, take one homeowner and you got 2 minutes. Okay, break it down, really simplify it. But why do you feel the HOA needs to just go away? And what, tell us why, what they did to you, because people need to be aware of those things. I can think of at least 4 people that could easily tell, have a pretty good HOA horror story that could help turn the tide on that.
I think it would also be helpful to either do a short videos or just a document that says, that kind of refutes the logic that people are using to keep it, or people that are in the middle ground, because I bet there's a bunch of people in the middle just don't really care, because it doesn't affect their lives right now. And something that says, okay, well, somebody says we have to have an HOA because our neighborhood will go to pot if we don't. Well, what does that mean? And then we talk about all of the other safeguards that already exist through the city, or just through being decent human beings, that wouldn't happen if you had no HOA. So I like the horror story thing, but I think it's also good to do the other side that says, here's some talking points. Here's some things that we've all discussed and we realize is we're just not getting. I think you start looking at the costs. Did you know that I don't know what Parker Brown was getting paid until you just told me. I had an idea it was a lot of money, but to me, that's a ton of money to let somebody drive a car and sit down in their little office and send out emails fining me for, I use weeds because that was the thing so irritating last year for so many people. Finding a weed I couldn't even discover, and then later found out they thought the suckers on my tree were weeds. So they're not even knowledgeable enough about what they're looking at to know what they're talking about.
And the fines that they're getting commission from.
Well, and it's the crazy thing is, okay, we take in our dues, $25,360 a year. We pay out 18,000 of that to Parker Brown. That doesn't leave a whole lot in the kitty to pay for other insurance policies, to pay for the neighborhood barbecue, to pay for this, to pay for that. And then you want to do these high dollar items like the dumpsters. Well, the dumpsters are $4,000 a year. Well, okay, now we have $4,000 left for the entirety of the year for every other special event.
And fun fact that each Lehigh City resident gets a free dump pass. We already have that built into our taxes. We're getting free dump passes from the city. It costs us nothing to take our stuff to the dump, nothing. And yet
John and I have,
our HOA is spending $4,000 a year.
and that's one of those things. John and I have brought that up repeatedly to people and just said, hey, look. And they're like, well, we don't have a truck. John and I will look at them and go, hey, we have 2 pickup trucks. Hi, I'm your neighbor. We're always more than willing to help somebody out. It's no big deal. It's no skin off my nose. Give me your dump pass, load my truck bed up with garbage, and I'll go run and get it done. No big deal. That's a big part of it.
I think, though, that would be a perfect thing to put on this document or in the video saying, hey, we're spending $4,000 a year for the dumpster. And every time I've gone to the dumpster, it's been full. So I would have had to go to, if I had some bulky item, I would have had to go to the dump anyway. Then say, oh, by the way, did you know you get a free dump pass? And here's how you manage, here's you get that dump pass. Here's how you use it. That way we're informing people so that they don't feel like they're losing something if the HOA goes away.
Exactly.
Well, and how are these people hauling their stuff to the dumpster? They still need a truck. They can use the same vehicle they're using hauling it to the dumpster than they are to hauling it to, yeah, it's just.
Stop using logic now.
Exactly. That's it. You're using logic, Rhonda.
Am I ruining the party? I'm sorry.
No.
I'm sorry.
Rebecca had a question. Go ahead, Rebecca.
Oh, it was a comment more than a question. One thing
okay.
that I think would be very useful to make sure that people know are what are the state granted rights that the HOA has, that no matter what we want to take out of the CCNRs, those are things that we can't remove, like the fact that they can foreclose on a house, and let people know those things, because I bet you there's a lot of people who have no idea what rights they're giving up just by having an HOA, because those are things we can't take out.
And that's a great point. And I know that's we've addressed some of that, here and there on like the website. And I believe it or not, in the town hall, I was kind of shocked that Chris Martin even addressed that particular topic and said, well, because we have an HOA, there are certain rules that we have to have, that they're just, they're state statutes, and or city laws, or, depending on the various levels, and they just have to be there. There's no way around that. When you have, an HOA, that is what it is. And I think that that's been something that's, we could focus better on that. And that's a big part of things, is this conversation, it has to be this conversation that keeps rolling, and everybody has to keep working on their own neighbors, too, trying to sit there and go, okay, when you see your neighbor down the street, go, oh, hey, what did you think of, what's going on with the HOA? I mean, I know John and I have talked to pretty much everybody within, well, probably a block in any direction almost. We're kind of, we've got some that we haven't caught up with yet, but, we're trying our best to, in light of COVID, not, directly approach people, because that's always a trick too. We want to make sure everybody's being respectful of everybody's space, but, trying to have that conversation. Let's face it, John and I do not go to church, so I have no idea what conversations are happening over there at the ward. I'm sure that there are some. I'm sure that there's probably been some here and there, but I don't know, what's going on there. And but we kind of have planned on moving forward and either doing a second flyer, or doing a mailer, and try and hit on some of these key points of, by having an HOA, we have to have the foreclosure and the lien rules and all of that stuff. These are things we can't get rid of. Like, everybody loved Chris Condi's proposal early on in this process, but it just can't happen. And that's the sad part about that, because it was actually a reasonable attempt at trying to understand everybody's feelings.
Well,
did you have something else, Rebecca?
I did talk to one of the neighbors, and one thing they brought up is that the flyer felt very attacking, the most recent one. Instead of joining together for our rights, it felt more like being attacked, is what she felt like it was. I mean, when I talked to her, she talked about wanting an HOA just because, like, a neighbor down the street wanted to pave their entire front yard for a parking lot. And she's like, I don't want to live down the street from a parking lot, which I can understand, but I'm pretty sure that would be a city issue anyway. But I think if we can make the flyers more informative than feeling like it's attacking the people who say they want an HOA, I think that would go a lot closer to getting those people who might be in the middle to come to our side.
And that's, that is definitely good feedback. Go ahead, Rhonda.
And we have to realize, and understand that the reason why, you go on, when we went through our business, we literally, we were moving, like we were so upset. 7 homes at the time out of the hundreds of homes on Zillow, for sale. We put our search thing, no HOA, 7 homes came up with no HOA at the time. And the reason why the city pushes for builders, for communities to have HOAs, it's because they're still, it's a way for them to kind of push the babysittingness of monitoring onto the citizens, forming these HOAs, and we're still paying the fine. We're still paying the HOA fee. That's a fine, or a tax. Not a fine, but a tax. But they're removing their responsibility just because of manning. It would be much more expensive for a city to hire on city employees to go around and babysit everything. So that's why you find that the city is 95% HOAs, because supposedly, that's kind of their answer of, we can't man it. So we're pushing that onto the citizenry. But it is not, anyway, I don't know exactly where I was going with that, but that's why we are so high, have such a high rate of having, HOAs, because it's just another way to be able to kind of push it onto us and tax us that way, without, it would cost the city much more to babysit this stuff. But all the HOAs can't do anything or enforce anything that the city can't enforce. Does that make sense?
Well, and a lot of it is these developers, there's kind of this part of, with the state, that they want to be able to, take, like, particularly you look at builders like Ivory Homes, which is one of the biggest ones around the state. And they are a powerful lobby. And a lot of times they will go and say, okay, we want the ability to cram in homes on a 0.10 acre lot, these tiny lots that really might actually violate zoning rules. And, but hey, we're going to go ahead and we're going to do an HOA. So they're all going to look great. And, then they make all these outlandish promises. And then it just winds up being this kind of a ongoing battle. And I think there's definitely some of that stuff going on too. And I can understand, we have a friend who moved out to Eagle Mountain, and her little section does not have an HOA. But they have some little committee to make sure that all the lots get filled out. And they used to live a couple doors down from us here in the neighborhood. And I'm like, so there's no HOA? She says, no. And I'm sitting there kind of going, yeah, you better watch your back, because that little committee could easily turn into an HOA without your approval even. And I think that's, part of it. And Rebecca, I certainly appreciate your feedback on the flyers. We kind of, being so close on the heels of the board, and they're kind of releasing all of that, we kind of took a chance on that. And it was more of we're trying to make sure that we get people's attention, and it doesn't, just look like every other real estate flyer that somebody tapes to the door or whatever. So we kind of took the chance on those flyers, trying to say, okay, let's try and make them more engaging, and honestly, in some aspects, help drive some of the people who weren't feeling like they were represented to have a little more higher irritation level, because that's how you get things passed. You speak to your audience. I've had a few people who didn't appreciate the Uncle Sam logo on the front, or one person in particular didn't like the word abolish in the in the documentation. But realistically, that is the process. We have to actually abolish or get rid of the existing CCNRs, and then move forward with getting rid of the corporation itself. But that is certainly good feedback. So, we did the one flyer. We've talked about doing another one. Definitely a different theme on this one, more along the lines of, as we've learned more too, because I've been sitting here at the computer every day, pounding away for 8 hours, trying to find out city codes and laws and anything and everything you can think of, trying to just make sure that we are doing our best to represent what is out there, what things are already covered. It is mind-numbing work. A lot of times sitting and reading the legalese that's in the proposal and that's in our CCNRs, and then trying to find some reference to it in the city codes or in the state codes is like, throwing a dart at the dartboard from a mile away. There just is so much trying to dig through that. When I asked the Lehigh City Code Enforcement Officer, who I say the Lehigh City Code Enforcement Officer, because we have one, I believe, is familiar with the situation. He does live here in the neighborhood. so he's very aware of what's going on. And yeah, it's definitely one of those things that trying to pour through all of that information is just, I don't feel that, I think you could have a team of people, 10 or 15 people going through it, and you might get 6 different answers on every one of those line items, depending on where you look in what code. Because there's so many things that just, they're just ridiculous. Um, so we're, but yeah, doing a flyer, being able to, or a mailer, something along those lines, kind of going, look, here are the positive things for not having an HOA. Here are the things that we're at risk of if we keep an HOA, and trying to have it as a healthy adult conversation, something that's a little less confrontational. I think is certainly a way to go. Um, we have done a MailChimp emailer, like an email newsletter, where we're sending that out. Unfortunately, that's one of those things of people have to give me their email address to add in. Uh, the board up will, would never give up the email list. I think they would probably have a full-on revolt if they did. And so that's kind of one of those things that, we started with, I want to say, like 9 subscribers to it. There's probably 20 or 25 now. And we've just yesterday modified the website where you can actually go to the website now and then register for the newsletter itself without any additional input from that. So that's, we're trying to move through with that. But this all leads to the ultimate goal, right? And that is to try and find votes to hopefully to just disband and get rid of the HOA and just make everybody's life a lot easier. At the worst, to prevent any any legislation from passing that doesn't unanimously benefit the neighborhood, which we're already creeping up on that number, I think, just based on the conversations I've had. And I'm sure it's one of those things of, there's a lot of people out there who just aren't vocalizing what their opinion is. Some of them might have businesses that they're worried could be affected by it. Some of them, there's always that fear, right? And there's always that fear. I've had a few people who didn't want to put yard signs up because they were afraid the board would target them after the fact. And that alone tells me that there's a problem. If people are that concerned that the board is going to target them for speaking their mind, the board has already lost all integrity. And there's just no coming back from that. So that's our big thing. We've got to work on trying to make sure that everybody is up to date on all of that. And I'm always up for opinions. Kind of our like I say, our next things that we had thought of were doing some sort of the videos, a mailer or flyer. Trying to get more people on the email list, because that's a great way. The yard signs are a great way to drive people towards the website. And I can always use help on content on the website. If there's something that you see that you want to see more information of, or something that just doesn't seem like it's worded right or whatever, please give me feedback. I mean, I can put the content out there all day, but if it's not resonating with people, then it's just not of any benefit. So I'm hoping that we can be working towards, having a vote sooner than later. They have not announced an annual meeting yet. So, there's still the hope that this can all happen maybe before we even get to the annual meeting. And that's got to happen by June sometime. We've got at least more than 30 days. I think that's one thing I do have that's interesting, is that when we had the town hall meeting, it was kind of reiterated to everyone who was there that, okay, we took the feedback, we're going to take this to our attorney. We should have an answer back in a couple of weeks at the most. And back out to, we were really wanting to move this process along is what we heard from the board. Well, there just hasn't been any communication whatsoever, which if there's anything that we've learned over the years we've lived here, communication is certainly not this HOA's strong suit as far as the board itself. You know,
Well, I know Stan made a comment on Facebook that he's like, it won't be before 30 days, but it will be before 90 days. I was like, 90 days, that's 3 months, that's forever. Like, if you want us to go fast, we need it back fast so we can do more revisions, because that's just going to take forever if every revision takes 3 months.
and that's one of those things. When I talked with one of our board members, you know, it was kind of the way that this was done is they paid $4,500 to do this rewrite. Well, that includes up to a certain number of hours. They were rapidly approaching that just after the town hall when they were sending the most recent feedback back to the, you know, well, if you're already at that point, rapidly approaching having spent $4,500 of our dollars out of our reserves, and let's face it, we don't, the rumored $100,000 in reserves doesn't even exist. What we really have is about between 50 and 60, because that was done as a bond through Comcast. That bond does not fully mature until 2028. So we lose $6,742, if memory serves, each year rolling backwards from that point. So they've for years said, oh, we have $100,000 in reserve. No, we don't. We have the equivalent of $100,000, assuming we meet all of the conditions set forth in that bond. And that's one of those things that, you know, okay, so if we have 50, you've already burned 10% of our reserves trying to fight for this rewrite process. So that's kind of the thing, you know, there's that, you know, financial responsibility, I think, too, you know, and that's a point we can certainly use as we're talking to our neighbors, is just go, look, you know, this cannot be an endless process. You know, the board has got to do what they're going to do, put it to a vote, and, you know, deal with the results therein. And so I think that's, you know, that works on our side for sure, because I'm sure that they're frantically, well, I say frantically, but I'm sure that they're trying to beat us to the punch, so to speak, because once we hit 30%, we can force them to call a special meeting. You know, once we hit that magic number, which is like 214, they are required to call a special meeting within 30 days by law. So anyways, that's, you know, we're constantly working on trying to make sure we have, you know, a good path going forward, and trying to make sure that we're doing our best to reach out to everybody and communicate with everybody. Because, you know, I would love to, at the end of the day, be able to sit here and go, oh, you know, everybody's done, you know, have met all of my neighbors, and, well, you know, you're not going to like everybody, but at least be able to understand where people come from. And I think that's a big one.
Thanks, Brendan and John, for everything that you do. I've got to bug out, but I just want to say thank you very much.
Rhonda, reach out to me on Facebook, and
Okay.
I've got some additional questions for you. I'll just catch you on like Messenger later.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks.
You're awesome. Thank you.
Bye.
So anyways, I know we're kind of losing people quick here, but was there any additional questions, feedback? Okay. Well, you know, I think we're in a good spot. We're, you know, trying to make sure that that we're working towards things. You know, Rebecca, I mean, if you have ideas as you're walking, you know, don't hesitate to come knock on the door and say hi. I mean, I haven't seen you in forever, it feels like. But you know, that's, you know, keep us posted, you know, and we'll do the same. We'll try and host another one of these calls probably a week from today, give or take. I'll try and get it updated on the website and everything pretty rapidly, once we have an idea figured out. And then, you know, if you want to get on the mailing list, just shoot me an email. It's brandon@disbandthehoa.com. If you just go to the Disband the HOA website, there is a link there on the contact us to send a message. So, you know, I appreciate you guys all being here, and you know, it was a great conversation tonight. I appreciate everybody, and you know, let's, you know, hope everybody can certainly benefit from our wisdom. We'll try and get this video posted and uploaded probably here within half hour, 45 minutes or so, and you know, we'll go from there. So again, I want to thank everybody, and you know, have a wonderful rest of your evening.